Hello and welcome to Unacademy. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis. Today we have to discuss two to three very important topics which are a continuation of what we done previously, and we have 7 to 8 topics lined up for you. So good morning to all of you. Now, before we begin, a very important announcement. Finally, the 19999 offer is back with 12 months extension. If you want to avail this, you have to use the code IAS English. As you can see here itself, IAS English code. And when you use this code, you will get the least price possible. So remember, 12 months free extension plus 19999 is back, and you should avail it as quickly as possible. Offer ends on 26 June, but why not do it now? Good morning. The PPT and the PDF of this session will be in this Telegram channel. So if you are meaning to store these, or if you are meaning to read these, please do subscribe to this channel in that regard. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Rahul asked me the question. No issues. We have very interesting, you can say, follow up concepts and follow up articles for today. It's more mains heavy than prelims. So we have the US getting involved in Iran. We'll talk about that. Thereafter, we have the expansionary policy in a slowing economy. This is a technical topic, interesting in that sense. Thereafter, what is the impact of foreign universities in higher education? Thereafter, we'll talk about the Indian economy and how it can figure out a certain path in the global troubles itself. Then we'll talk about how India is lagging behind multiple important developed nations in semiconductor tech and other important indicators. We have INS Tamil, which has been commissioned. And last but not the least is these two topics are connected to one another, which is the US getting involved in Iran and India ramping up its imports from Russia with regards to oil. Why white t-shirt today? Felt like it. So no specific reason, but the idea is we will now discuss these 7 to 8 topics, and we will try to figure out how over the past 2 days things have gone through with regards to Iran and Israel. Right? Okay. Yes, Rahul, please go ahead. I'll see your question. Albedo effect is happening. Very good. Okay. Uh interesting note. Now, if you remember, the comprehensive batch of history on Plus Kirti will start. Ancient medieval art and culture starts next month, July end or August. It will start. Modern India has already happened. Ancient medieval art and culture is lined up. Right? Okay. Is 25 still a good age to start preparation? Yes. Why not? 25 is very good. You have found your basic mojo and your backup plan, and now you can work for 25 is not late. Okay. Now, if you remember on Thursday and Friday when we met, we had discussed what is Israel's larger end game. If you remember, there was an article which said, what is Israel's end game in this whole process of Iran attacks and the Iran nuclear involvement in that? And therein, we had three options available to us. This is how you can say different weeks interact with one another. The first one we discussed was that in Iran, the government would be toppled and there would be a leadership change. Leadership change. The second topic we talked about was, or the second option available to Israel was to involve the US in the war. Or the third one was go for a diplomatic channel based ceasefire. These were the three options, if you remember, which we discussed. Now, when we talk about the first option, over the past since 13th June, now exactly 10 days, it has become very clear that this is not going to happen as of right now. Meaning, we don't see a leadership change in the US, or rather in the Iranian sector, not in the US. We don't see a leadership change in the Iranian sector. They will survive. Rather, they have united, the Israelis have united the concept itself in that regard. Thereafter, the other two channels was diplomatic channel fire and involvement of the US in the war itself. Now, when we talk about nuclear diplomacy, in the same article we discussed that if Israel wanted nuclear diplomacy, disarmament, or any form of, you can say, going forward, an argument where there would be a mild or soft power based understanding, it would not have struck Iran itself, because the seventh meeting of the US and Iranians for what is called as the US Iranian nuclear deal was happening. So therefore, the timing did not show something like that. And this is where what we had contemplated, what we were expecting, and with regards to how finicky Trump is, Trump has got involved in this war directly. He was asked this question multiple times: will you bomb Iran? Will you bomb Iran? Over Thursday, Friday was asked this question. Till Saturday, he did not say anything. But the idea is that finally, Saturday and Sunday, US got involved, and that is where this article comes. Nitin, the logic is not based on that. It is on what the newspaper articles are. So it is, we obviously will repeat a lot of topics because the newspaper is repeating those. But we keep on adding to the idea itself. So in a Sunday newspaper, you have the whole week summarized. This happened on Saturday, Sunday. Therefore, on Monday, you Hindu newspaper is covering it. That is the logic which goes forward. So it is not that we repeat topics. It is just that the newspaper has nothing new to tell us, and rightly so also. Now, this was the second or the third option which was available to Israel. And Israel, in that regard, has now involved the US directly. I'm repeating, last week, multiple articles talked about what is Israel's larger plan for anybody who's new to this. And we said maybe, or the newspaper said, maybe it will lead to leadership change in Iran. That did not happen. Thereafter, it said maybe they want a diplomatic way of solving this issue and Israel's disarmament, which is their nuclear arsenal, to be reduced. That again, timing did not prove. And that is where the third issue or the third option, which is US involvement in the war, was imminent and has also happened. Why did US get involved? It already has a problem with Iran and its nuclear program, and Israel and Iran are very good partners when it comes to Israel and the US are a very good partner in the larger scheme of things when it comes to how West Asia is being in a way balanced. Russia, Iran, and Assad's government previously in Syria used to be one bloc. Now Syria has gone out, and this is where US has an interest to take out the Iranian regime so that it can have a pro-US regime there. Now, first two options did not go through. Finally, we have this. Now, what happened over the weekend? See, the Israelis had themselves attacked these two places, which is called Natanz and Isfahan. But the problem in Natanz and Isfahan was that the nuclear establishments were not over the ground, but underground. And their biggest, you can say, nuclear enrichment program, the Iranian nuclear, is based in Fordo. And Fordo is a very big fortified nuclear establishment where enrichment happens, but again, 96 meters under the ground. Now, why was the US needed here? Was because of this bomber. The B-2 stealth bomber, what is called as the Spirit stealth bomber. The B-2 bomber is needed because it has the capacity and it has the feature of bombing with a specific type of weapon, which is called the 14 GBU 57 MOP. Now, in a very simple words, or very simply, this bomb is a bunker busting bomb. Bunker busting means that they have two components. first component first busts the ground or enters into the bunker, and the second component explodes. So for Fordo, Nataz, and Ishfan, you need bunker busting bombs to actually make any real impact. Because when Israel bombed these sectors, there was superficial damage only over the ground establishments, which did not really have anything. On the other hand, when we talk about these three sectors now, these three sectors have now proper craters. And the fact that six B-2 bombers have took off from the US and reached Israel, and the fact that multiple Tomahawk missiles were also fired, means that the US, as we had predicted, was needed to make any form of real, you can say, consequential damage in Iran itself. However, this is not a good thing, as multiple news channels, multiple newspapers, and even experts are saying. The US getting directly involved in Israel Iran now further destabilizes this region, because thereafter, now either this will in turn lead to further Iran going into a tailspin, which would lead to either the regime going out, or the whole government will be toppled, or this will further escalate, because Iran, in retaliation to this, has done two things. So before I talk about the retaliation, what is this article about? It's an update. The update is, last week we were discussing what was the end game of Israel. And today I am giving you an update how the newspapers work, is that US has now attacked the Iranian sector directly. There is a specialized video on this also. But what is more important is that in retaliation to these strikes where bunker busting bombs were used by the B-2 bomber, there are now two consequences direct. First is that the ballistic missile strikes on Israel has increased, and Israel has shown now very significant damage. But the second and the most important is again something which we had discussed and was on the cards, which is the Iranian parliament has now authorized the Iranian military and the Iranian authorities to create a choke point on the Straits of Hormuz. This came last night, late night, which is that Iran previously was contemplating stopping the oil and the cargo movement in the Straits of Hormuz as a desperate measure. Overnight, the Iranian authorities have now taken a call that they would want to and they will now hold any movement in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman towards the Arabian Sea. And if you remember what we discussed on Thursday, one fourth of the global supply of oil goes from this sector, which would also contemplate as one fifth of all consumption on earth itself of oil. It is not that Iran will stop supplying. It is that the other nations which are supplying in this sector, they will not get free passage here. And this is where the US getting involved has now led to the consequence which nobody wanted, which is the global supply chain will get affected. And already the Brent oil had, the prices had gone up. It has now reached $77 per barrel. And for India, which is a very big oil importing nation, these things will have a consequence. So from 13th June onwards, first, we were superficial damage by Israel. Israel realized that that is not enough. The US was going to get involved. Iran was contemplating retaliation. US got involved, and the retaliation in turn has now led to a point which again we were trying to predict, which is that the Straits of Hormuz is going to now become problematic. And therefore, yes, 20% to 25% of all oil which is going through this sector is for Asian sector, is for the Asian sector. 84% of that 20% is actually for the Asian sector. 20% of global supply of oil goes from this sector. And this is where the second article comes, that India since 13th April, since 13th June, had already started to increase its oil imports from other nations. And this is where this has direct impact on India's interest. If you remember, in that article, we discussed how India has diversified its channel of what we call as imports or oil itself. And this is where India has ramped it up exponentially. And In a way, in this month itself, we will be importing 20 to 30% extra oil because we know that oil prices are now going to go up. So India's purchase of Russian oil has increased along with the other suppliers, which is Saudi Arabia and Iraq. And India most probably is going to import 2 to 2.2 million barrels per day of Russian crude oil. Now, the Russian angle is, since Ukraine and Russia and the sanctions which were put on Russia by the US and the NATO nations, India had become a very important partner for Russia and its oil. From importing only 1%, our 40 to 44% of oil now comes from Russia. And at a very cheap rate because Russia has no one else to supply in that. And therefore, with regards to Iraq, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and Russia, India has already started to preempt something bigger. And therefore, from 1.96 million barrels per day, we also have increased the import from the US, and we most probably will have at least 20 to 30% more oil than what we previously had. India as is the world's third largest oil importing nation, and therefore all of this has an impact for us. 5.1 million barrels, don't have to learn this, comes from abroad per day. But we have now started to increase the Russian oil even more. So, what are these two articles talking about together? Iran and Israel battle or war has now become, what the concept is, it's proliferated or it has spread. Now it has US involvement. And with US involvement, we know that the nuclear establishments of Iran have been hit now properly because of bunker busting bomb. Now, with US involvement, Iran will retaliate. It has already retaliated with ballistic missiles, but the movement in Strait of Hormuz is going to become problematic. One of you saying, will US not do something about the Straits of Hormuz? It may, but if it will, what will happen is it will make this war even bigger in that region. It will go beyond the borders of Iran. And the idea is, because one fourth of all global supply of oil comes from this sector, not because of Iran's supply, but because of the world supply. What we will now see and what we contemplate is this will have a direct impact on the prices of oil. And India, in that regard, has increased Russian imports so that we can, in a way, balance this shift. Something which was in 9% increase in futures had already happened, but it had cooled down to 2.4%. But now we are believing that this will go upwards of at least 10% with regards to how things have happened in the past 2 days. Simple, simple, straightforward article. Is this clear to everyone? A update in what happens in this relationship. This is not, see, never use the word world wars so loosely, because world wars would mean this time a nuclear war. And therefore, it's just that West Asia is now getting even more destabilized. But third world war would be when you would have, for example, the involvement of the NATO members directly. So the simple, straightforward point here is US Trump was contemplating something like this, and now they are getting involved directly or are now involved directly itself. Don't you think Iran should be? It is not a member of the NPT. It is not a member of the NPT. Meanwhile, ISIS is rising. Yes, true, Nitin. Meanwhile, what is happening is wherever the US has, for example, in the Syrian sector, it is now allowing Islamic radicalist organizations to come back. So this is where this question becomes very relevant. That the involvement of the US in the Iran and Israel conflict will further destabilize the region. Do you agree? So the argument is very simple. In the introduction, you would have to talk about how the US got involved recently. In the body, you have to talk about the consequences. The consequences is that now the oil market and the oil supply will get affected. As one of you said, it will further lead to spaces for old organizations, ISIS, and even other terrorist organizations to come back. And and if Iran goes into a tailspin, let's be very honest. Let's be very honest. US does not have a good track record of, in a way, placing democratic institutions in the West Asian sector and then also allowing those institutions to develop properly. And the best example of that is going to be which nation? What is the answer to that question? Give me an example of a nation where the US installed a democratic regime in the name of democracy and oil, and thereafter that nation is now in the exact situation it started from and is now, in a way, regressing rather than progressing. Iran, they don't have control, not Iraq. Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the best example of something like this. In Afghanistan, the Americans got involved directly. They installed a democratic regime itself. Iraq and other sectors are also there. But Afghanistan, much like Vietnam, Afghanistan is the best example of something. Because Afghanistan, there was a forced regime brought in and then they withdrew. This is exactly what they will do in Iran also. If they enter and so-called democratic regimes are brought in, Saudi Arabian interest is going to come through, and this will destabilize Iran further, in turn creating more space for terrorist organizations and radical organizations to be there. Yes, the US is known to have messed up the whole West Asian sector. This is further going to do that only. So this is something, tomorrow also I will have something for sure about this, because this whole week, till there is no conclusion to this, there will be multiple articles. So I'm giving you an update here about what has happened. More specialized videos will follow, but as a person reading the newspaper, just telling you what has happened over the past two. Right? Clear? Okay. Now the second article is more interesting and it's a little bit technical. So what I want from you is that you have to understand first the difference between monetary policy, fiscal policy, and how the stance which the government of India and the RBI has taken has in turn led to a very interesting juncture, because we have never seen both fiscal policy and monetary policy in the same space and both in positive. We'll talk about that, how that comes through. But as I said, what is an expansionary policy in a slowing economy? And what is the, you can say, consequence of something like this is what we have to discuss. This is from text and context. You may not find it in regional editions, only in the editions which are metropolitan. Right now, the RBI recently, in the past two of its meetings of the MPC, has cut the repo rate first 25 basic points, which is 25%, and then 50 basic points. So 0.25% and 0.5%. The repo rate has been decreased. And the RBI is forecasting that our GDP growth is going to be 6.5% and inflation is in a good band of 4% plus minus 2, which is 3 to 4% is considered good with plus minus 2. Now, the question is that how do we understand this when in February already the government gave concessions in income tax? Meaning, what the RBI is doing is controlling money supply. This becomes part of monetary policy. And what the government does through its, you can say, taxation expenditure, capital expenditure, called fiscal policy. So very simply, fiscal policy is how the government, you can say, creates growth in the economy through taxation, through its expenditure. It tries to bring in money supply or create employment. On the other hand, monetary policy is for price stability, which is if there is inflation, if there's too much money supply, or if there's too less money supply, the monetary policy is changed by. So this monetary policy is changed by the central bank. Fiscal policy is changed by the government of India. The finance ministry will do it. Monetary policy tries to increase or decrease, it's like a tap, tries to increase or decrease the money supply into the economy so as to make sure that the price volatility is not too much. So this is for price stability, this is for fiscal policy, or this is for basically growth in the economy. So the first thing which you need to understand is what is the difference between monetary policy and fiscal policy. Now, I've used a word which is called repo rate. Now, repo rate simply means it is the percentage or at the cost or the interest at which the central bank is going to lend to the banks. So the central bank, in you can say uh, in exchange of collaterals which would be government bonds, the commercial banks can take loans from the RBI, and the percentage at which, the interest rate at which they are going to take it, is called repo rate. Reverse repo would be when the central bank is borrowing from the commercial banks, and repo rate is when the commercial banks are borrowing from the RBI. Now, whenever there is too much money supply, repo rate is increased so that the lending rates increase, so that the money supply goes down. However, when you have a deflationary trend, a slowing economy, or consumption is less, or investment is less, what happens is repo rate is reduced so that the commercial banks can borrow at a very low rate and then transfer it to the local borrowers or to the people who can also borrow at a very, very cheap rate. So repo rate relationship is whenever there will be too much inflation, repo rate will be increased. When there will be what we call as deflationary trend, repo rate will be decreased so that money supply or consumption goes up. But this is where this article becomes very important, because it says that in most cases, if you decrease repo, and see, RBI has decreased repo rate twice. And this means that this may lead to runaway inflation. This comes from the conclusion that at the same point of time, repo rate has been reduced, taxes, income taxes have also been reduced. And this is called both positive. There's a positive monetary policy also, and there's a positive fiscal policy also. It's called the expansionary policy with regards to fiscal policy also, an expansionary policy related to the concept of monetary policy. And this is where the article says we have never seen something like this previously, because you tend to balance. If you are having an expansionary monetary policy, you will then maybe have an accommodative, or in a way, a policy where the government is trying to control the money supply through its fiscal policy. We have never seen both positive. And why both positive is never important, or is dangerous in that regard? Because, for example, if I have a fiscal policy which is what we call as expansionary, where we are trying to increase the money supply, and if we have a monetary policy which is also expansionary, is trying to increase money supply, the end result is inflation which may go above 6 to 8%. Why? Because with reduced interest rates, there should be increase in investments because people will borrow more. With increased government spending or taxes being cut, there will be more disposable income to the people, which is more income with you and me. And thereafter, our demand will increase, and therefore our consumption will increase. If both will increase, aggregate demand increases in the economy itself. If that happens, then there will be a cascading domino effect, which will in turn lead to a rise in inflation, because now there is more money chasing the already either constant or steadily increasing supply in that. Now, this is where the article says that why is that we have to have both as positive. I'm repeating myself. There's fiscal policy, there's monetary policy. And I want everybody's consent that we are understanding what we're trying to say. When we talk about fiscal policy is how the government spends, how it taxes you, and it also has an effect on how much money or income you have with you, and therefore it has an impact on consumption. Monetary policy, on the other hand, is the policy which the central bank follows in order to increase or decrease the money supply, in order to have price stability in the economy. Now, in most cases, when we have an expansionary monetary policy, the fiscal policy is accommodative because if not, it will lead to runaway inflation. And at the same point of time, if there's a fiscal policy where the taps are fully open, the monetary policy tends to dampen it because if there's too much consumption or demand, it will in turn lead to inflation. The concept of inflation is price will go up if the demand keeps on increasing, supply doesn't. Do we understand this point? That how we are in a unique position right now where both the monetary and the fiscal policy are positive and are both expansionary or in a way positive, want to increase more and more consumption. Now the question is, why is that? Can we inflation till a point is good. Inflation 4%, 6% is good. But if you have double digit inflation, it is not good. And that further leads to another set of issues where you would have to then, you can say, in a way, suck up all the extra cash. If not, then the inflation will have an overall impact on consumption. So are we all on the same? So Rahul, what matters is where we are with regards to inflation. Meaning 4 to 6% is good. Double digit inflation is never good for the economy because then it will further impact the middle class and the lower middle class because their purchasing power will go down. Right? Okay. Now, the article now says, why is there a need to have both monetary and fiscal policy in the same space? And the answer to that question comes from the February change in fiscal policy. What this article argues is that the tax concessions which were given with regards to the budget have not been enough. Meaning, the more income which was expected has not automatically led to increase in consumption or investment. Now, what are the indicators for something like this? The indicators are that credit growth, I told you a little bit technical article, is at a 3-year low, meaning people asking for credit, it is at the 3-year low. Unemployment has increased from 4% to 5.6%. And the tax cut did not increase spending. And therefore, the need of the hour was change in monetary policy, which is that with repo rate going down, most probably lending should become cheaper. And maybe that may increase spending. That may increase. So, what this article of text and context argues is that the reason why we need both expansionary at this point of time is because fiscal policy intervention has not been enough. But there is a fallout here. Because in the short term, this may be useful, but in the long term, there's a fallout. Can anybody tell me if fiscal policy is expansionary and there are too many tax cuts, what is going to increase or what is going to be the fallout? Let's check your base economics. Do you understand that? Short term, it can lead to spending and investment. A monetary policy, lending cheaper, can also lead to further consumption. But both having positive has a long term fallout. Inflation increase is very good. If monetary policy remains expansionary, inflation is going to increase. But if fiscal policy is expansionary, what is going to happen to the government? If you all are giving me monetary policy fallout, what is the fallout from fiscal policy? What is the fallout from fiscal policy? No, not bankruptcy. There's a different word for it. What is the word, official word for when the government expenditure keeps on increasing, but its revenue does not increase? What is the exact? Very good, Nitin. Very good. Yes, very good. See, this is what this will do is the fiscal deficit will increase. Meaning, if monetary policy is expansionary, positive means expansionary, it will lead to increase in inflation. This we already know because money supply is too much. However, if fiscal policy will remain the way it is, where the government tax collections will go down, and that in turn will lead to a fiscal deficit because the expenditure is higher than revenue or the receipts itself. Therefore, the government needs to now coordinate these two properly. That is the word which is used. Coordinate these two properly. Because if both remain in the same space, we may have a dual effect which is negative on the economy itself. We have a slowing economy. It is, as it's called, it's a deflation, or what is called as a recessionary economy where consumption is not picking up, or more than that, investment is not picking up. And in that sense, you are trying to push it. But if you push it too much, it will then have an impact on government spending. It will then have an impact on the economy itself. So this is a very technical question which can come in GS paper 3, which is the current expansionary stance of the government and the RBI is indicative of larger consumption based issues in the economy. Explain. And this is where you have to understand that how to approach this type of question. In the introduction, you have to talk about the repo rate being reduced. But in the body, you have to talk about both fiscal and monetary policy. And you have to indicate how in the fiscal policy, a positive stance taken in the February, you can say, budget did not increase consumption. And that is where the monetary policy has been kept expansionary twice now so as to increase consumption. But in the end, you would have to talk about, and you need to talk about, the concept of how this has a fallout. If these two remain in the positive for a long time, either we will have runaway inflation or we will have fiscal deficit, which is not a good thing for the government itself. Already we are not meeting our, you can say, targets for fiscal deficit or prudence in that regard. Yes. So these are questions which are based on current affairs, but have a lot of static embedded inside them. So we've discussed two articles right now. One, an update article on what is happening with regards to Iran and Israel. US has got involved and what is the fallout for India and how we have increased our imports. Second is based on the concept of a expansionary stance of monetary and fiscal policy in an economy which is slowing. Does this make sense, everyone? PISA, because the way the world economy is integrated with one another, it will in turn lead to certain fallouts. Because once the global supply chain actually starts to get affected, Russia, Ukraine had a very strong, you can say, recessionary trend based impact on the European sector because the oil and gas was coming from that sector. In the same way, if Iran, West Asia gets destabilized, it will impact the oil. And more than that, because both these, the Straits of Hormuz is very important for global, you can say, economy and global trade. You can't really do anything. So there will be a cascading effect. War always has a cascading impact, and that is where this whole concept is. Okay. Now let's move to the third article. Why we talk about RR? Should we not focus? See, Asha, you always write the immediate current affairs. Meaning, if you will start to write the history of current affairs in the introduction will become 100 words. And in a question which may be 150 or 200 words, you have to always be very clear and clear cut understanding should. So, in intro, you give the most immediate development which has happened. So, for example, in an Israel, Iran, US question, you always write about US involvement. Don't start from 13th June. If you talk about it in one word, but you talk about the most immediate impact and most immediate current affairs. That is how you write an introduction. It has to be crisp. It has to be not more than 50 words. Because if you're writing more than that, you're wasting words in that. If Iran's nuclear activities are considered to be global threat, then how is Pakistan? See, Kim, good question. But this is called the hypocrisy of the West. Because the US thinks it controls Pakistan, and in a way they have a pro Pakistan approach, they will keep Pakistan as an actor alive because that allows US to balance India. But Iran has been, it's not a conflict, right? It's been a conflict for now decades. Iran, Israel, and the US complex, if you want to call it, is very old. Iran has always been balanced by the US via Israel, and therefore, the idea that Iran is a threat and Pakistan isn't is perception based understanding. Is a perception based understanding. And that is where you have to understand that it's not just about NPT, it's about how different countries balance each other. It's a balancing act. So for India, US has a balancing act in the form of Pakistan. For Israel, there's a balancing act for Iran. So that is how US gets involved. It keeps on having a multi-pronged approach so as to destabilize sectors which stay within this area of confusion. That is why West Asia got fully destabilized by the US. Because US was funding a terrorist organization same point of time. It was saying that we want democracy in Afghanistan. ISIS was created by the US. Mujahideen was created by the US, which later became Al Qaeda, was created by the US. Taliban created by the US. If you actually look at it, all organizations which later went out of hand were all created by the US only. So when there was Russian power in Afghanistan, they created Mujahideen, which in turn led to the process of Taliban's creation. But later, when it went out of their hand, they came out of Afghanistan. Same story happened in the Syrian sector. In that whole sector, in order to destabilize Assad's regime, ISIS was funded by the US. Once it became out of their hand, thereafter they said that ISIS is the problem, and they went after ISIS, and now Assad is also gone. Now a terrorist is sitting in the position of the regime in Syria because, quote unquote, that is a democratic regime which the US thinks it can control. The same was done in Iraq, the same was done in Kuwait, the same was done across this sector everywhere. Libya, same story. The US creates the actors which later become problematic for them in the long run. If you look at the larger engagement of the US in this sector, Pakistan is being kept alive because the US thinks India is a bigger issue in the larger scheme of things. So it's a balance. The same way China has now started to have a same type of policy, which is keep debt imperialism alive across the African sector, across West Asia, and create a balancing. So this is standard US protocol, standard US balancing, that you keep on creating actors which become which are trying to have a anti-US approach. They will create an actor. So for if Pakistan is for India, what Israel is for Iran for the US, right? I hope this makes sense. This is the larger story here. Now, the third article, the third article, which we have to discuss is foreign universities are establishing their campuses in Gift City in Ahmedabad, in Navi Mumbai. We've been hearing this for a very long time now that foreign universities are coming, foreign universities are coming. And finally, five from the UK and one each from, rather, seven from the UK, five from Australia, one each from US, Italy, and Canada are now going to establish their campuses in Navi Mumbai Gift City. And the new education policy tends to favor establishment of these foreign campuses in India itself. Now, the question is why, how will it impact? At the same point of time, what are the challenges? What are the challenges? Right? Now, first things first, we have to understand why. Why do these universities need to come to? And the argument which is given by the article is these countries, have a very big issue. And their issue is that their domestic admissions are falling, are falling. So domestic admissions, basically with their population reaching to a certain point, it is very clear that their domestic admissions cannot increase and they have to expand. And in these developed countries, the expenditure by the government on education is also following, also falling. Now, in that case, they need money and they need admissions. So what they rely on is foreign students, and because they pay higher fees. You must have seen this. If in any university you will go, if your, for example, your fees is 10,000 rupees, for a foreign student, that fees is going to be 2 lakh rupees. So the universities and colleges always seek foreign students because they are paying higher fees. Now, if you go by the data which is given in the article, in the UK, 22% of all admissions within the colleges and universities is foreign. In Australia, that is 24%. In Canada, it is 30%. And though in the US, it is only 6% in Ivy League schools and colleges and universities, it is 27%. It is 27%. True, Anushka. And therefore, the percentage of foreign students in most US Ivy League universities and Canada, Australia, UK is quite substantial. But what the article argues is there has been a fallout because of this trend, which is this leads to immigration, and with xenophobia, Islamophobia, migrant refugee understanding, this immigration into these developed nations of students and them staying back has in turn led to a lot of, you can say, anxiety and social discord in these countries. And that is why in Australia, there are now quotas, meaning there is a cap on how many students you can take from a certain country. UK has also capped the number of student visas which can be given. And therefore, now these nations and their governments are following what is called an inward looking policy. Inward, Stanford, Harvard, or Ivy League colleges. So they have an inward looking policy. Inward looking policy is they want to protect their, you can say, in the uh, idea is that they want to protect this rhetoric that we are not bringing in immigrants. So now the question is, if still this issue remains, how to figure out a new way? And the solution which has come up is rather than bringing them to Australia, go to them. And that is why foreign universities are now ready to establish campuses within India because they think this is a better solution than creating social anxiety in their own nation. It is easier for developing campuses in India and therefore take, or for example, also develop a campus in China or multiple others. You have more Chinese students than Indian students in these universities. But the idea is if we are ready to dish out so much money in Australia, we should be ready to give it in India also, and therefore these foreign campuses should work in the larger scheme of. However, there are challenges. So just to summarize what we've done till this point, very simply, three things. First, there are UK, Canada, and other developed nation-based universities that are ready to develop campuses in India. The question was why? Why? Because foreign students have to pay higher fees. Indians are paying very, very exorbitant fees in UK for the same type of degree which they get in India. Now, because further migrant, rather because of migration, which is in most cases permanent also with multiple changes in visa status, there's a lot of social anxiety and backlash in the nations itself where these universities are. So the simple straightforward solution, in order to keep their admissions high and also keep their, you can say, budget sustainable, they are now developing campuses in India. But now there's a very important question, which is, will they be successful and will this be a solution to them? So the first challenge is very simply, if somebody asks you 2 lakh rupees to do a BA honors course in UK, and if they ask 2 lakh rupees in India, will we pay 2 lakh rupees in India? What is the answer to that question? 10 lakh rupees for an honors degree in US, we will be able to dish out. But will we pay same amount of money in India? Yes. The answer to that question is no. We are very price sensitive. So when we talk about this concept, the cost sensitivity, you may be Harvard, may be Stanford, you may be Cambridge or Oxford University. In India, nobody is going to pay 40 lakh rupees for a degree which you may get for 18,000, 20,000, 50,000 or 1 lakh rupee in Delhi University or any other university in India. So though we have a 40 million plus, you can say, pool of students who are seeking some form of graduation, post graduation, we will never be, and we are cost sensitive, we are price sensitive. So for very simply, if they don't have a structure which accommodates for this cost sensitivity, they will fail very quickly. They will fail very, very quickly. We will eat the same banana which has been exported from India to Australia. For one banana, we will be ready to pay 500 rupees because it will taste better in Australia. But we will still make sure that we are bargaining with the seller to give us that banana in India for 35 rupees per kg, not 40 rupees. Over 5 rupees, we will kill him. But we will eat the same exact banana exported to Australia for 500 rupees, saying it tastes better. It's taste of India. This is our mentality. We will pay more, but only when it is in UK, in Australia, in the US, not in India. So if Oxford University is established in Ahmedabad, and people in India will very simply say, this is not Oxford University. They will say, this is not Cambridge. They will simply say, this is Indian Oxford, Indian Cambridge. So what we will do is we will create one more division. You are from Cambridge University. Which one? Indian one or Britain one? And we will then start to discriminate on that also. And imagine that if BA honors a basic graduation, post graduation happens at this cost, the engineering and medical degrees will be even more expensive. So price sensitivity and cost sensitivity is something which they have to understand. True, Nikhil. True. We have BITS campus. We have multiple other you can say private universities, which charge the same money for two other campuses, but nobody is going to pay for that much, right? So nobody is going to pay. So very simply, cost sensitivity is something which they have to take into. Second, quality, which is if they are hiring everything in India, or everything rather, I'll say all the teachers are Indians, all the staff is Indian, and if they then charge 40 lakh rupees, then they will further not pay anything. If you bring in overseas teachers, that has a cost. So the question is, how do you maintain the same quality in India and in the US at the same given point? Third, in most cases, Indians have a certain mentality. Study abroad and work abroad. We tend to, there is also one case where some want to study abroad, but they are forced to come back to work in India. Now, the question is, if the whole case was that I will go to Australia, study in Australia, get a degree in Australia, and then work in Australia, then I was ready, pay 1 crore rupees for sure. But if I pay 1 crore rupees, I stay in Ahmedabad or Navi Mumbai only, and in the end, I know that I will be then competing with the same people, and I'm in India only, then why will I pay that much? Think of the lure is, where are you going? Canada. My child is studying in Canada. There's a prestige issue also, right? कहाँ है आपका बेटा? Abroad है. Where is he doing his BA honors from, or his engineering from? He's doing his technical degree from the US. That has a lot of prestige and pride in India. But if the campus is next to a government college and both have to seek for the same job, then what's the point? So the point is that if the idea is study abroad, work abroad, then if you are already in India, then why would they want to go to Oxford University? You are better off doing it from the government university. And in the short term, their intake will be so low that it will have no impact on you. I'll give you a very good example of a university which gives you same level of education as University of Madras, University of Delhi University, or be it University of Calcutta, but takes the fees 100x more. Ashoka University. In Delhi University, a BA honors history degree, when I did it, or masters when I did it, it was 18-19,000 per semester. So it comes out as maximum taken everything into consideration, 50,000 rupees. Today it may have been increased to 50 to 75,000, maximum a lakh, according to which college you are in. For the same degree, it is called liberal arts. They will charge you 8 to 10 lakh rupees for the same skill set, same exact skill set. So you tell me, why will anybody do that course? And have you seen multiple further Shashi Tharoors come out of that university, that we have everybody having a liberal arts degree, and thereafter everybody, the intellectual discourse of the academia and the intellectual discourse of universities in India has gone up because of these universities coming through? No. It's a small circle of people. They can't go abroad. They will never get admission in Delhi University or in JNU or in Ambedkar University or in University of Calcutta, because there you need marks. So therefore they go for these degrees which have money, and they have neither there, neither there. Neither prestige of going abroad, neither the skill set or the pride of being a part of a University of Delhi, Calcutta, BHU or Allahabad or be it anywhere. So na idhar ke na udhar ke. St. Stephen's, the fees is higher because it's a minority institution. It can charge high. Masters used to happen 7,000 rupees in Hindu. I paid 23,000, 25,000 for the same masters. So separate issue altogether. The idea is very simple. Looking at the challenges, it's a mentality based issue. So what this article points out is, How will foreign universities impact higher education? The simple conclusion with this article says zero. It will, in the short term, have no real impact. In the long term, for long term impact, they have to take into consideration these challenges. If they still are going to sit in their ivory towers and charge the same fees which they charge in the US, in the UK, or in Australia, nobody is going to pay for it. This they can take in writing itself. Right? So, a sophisticated way of asking this exact same question is this how UPSC will ask you. Foreign universities setting up campuses in India is part of larger change in educational landscape in India and abroad. Critically examine. Simple question is why are they coming here? Will there be a change in that regard? Simple. So, this type of question you cannot answer without the data or the concepts which I've shared with you. So, I hope that you will use that understanding to write a good answer. Are we clear? 4 articles we've done, all coming from the editorial itself. One more editorial article is left, data point. But before I go towards that, I hope all of this is making sense, right? Which is that to understand that the educational landscape is changing, but for a reason. Further, you understand why the US has got involved and what is the implication of that. Further, what is the concept of an expansionary monetary and fiscal policy? Okay. Monu, the interesting thing is an IIT and a Delhi University and a University of Madras, Calcutta, or any other university in India will give you better skill set than some random course which you will do abroad, because that is geared for their system itself. That is why in most cases, I have multiple of my friends who had done their BA honors or masters from Columbia and all. They've gone back because their skill set is useless in India, because after they have studied from these institutions, they will now have to clear net, which is MCQ based question paper. They will now have to clear MCQ based understandings. We evaluate in a totally different way. We don't evaluate our students on the basis of discourse, intellectual strength. We evaluate them on the process of how much ratification you can do. And that is where I have also seen multiple lawyers. You have done a LLB or LLM from from the UK, from Britain, and they are not able to clear the bar council examination because the whole concept itself is different. The idea itself is very so happens. So any day, if any university in India, government funded central university, you are getting admission, you have acumen, you have academic acumen. Nobody randomly gets into any of these central universities. You need marks and you need understanding. So it is easier to get admission in private institutions in the US, in the UK, in Canada, in Australia. The students who actually cannot get absorbed in very good colleges here, but we still are caught up in what is called as colonial mentality. Because if you are a, for example, BHU student and somebody comes from some very small, very chutmut college, University of Rose or University of Sussex, unisex, this sex, that sex, what is going to happen is we will value that person more than a person actually who got 98%, went to SRCC, or 98% and then went through BHU or Allahabad University or University of Calcutta. That is called colonial mentality. So we will give value that person more because he's come from some small university from the UK or Scotland or Wales in that regard. That is where we have to change our perception that it is much harder to get into any institution in India than actually getting it is easier because we are foreign students. Because we are foreign students, we have different quota, and there it's only about money. You can give as much money as possible, but if you cannot clear the cutoffs in DU in other universities in India, you will never get it. So here you have to be meritorious to get through. That is the simple forward concept, right? Okay. Now moving on, 2 articles which are related to one. The first one is Indian economy, how to steer them with regards to global troubles which are happening as of right now. 4 or 5 terms are there, I'll discuss it with you. And then we'll discuss the concept of data point, which is where is India lacking in critical technology. So, what this article talks about is taking into consideration the tariff wars. Now, pay attention. Taking into consideration Russia and Ukraine, taking into consideration the concept of Israel and Iran now, and taking into consideration the general outlook of the world economy as of right now, India needs to, India needs to, yes, true, Sapna, true. India needs to now find a way to survive in this environment. There are global troubles, you all know that. And this is where this the article is written by a person coming from the FICI itself. That is why it has value for us. There are 4 or 5 terms which are used for it. First, he says that we need to manage external shocks. Can anybody give me an example of an external shock which we've just discussed 1 hour back? External shocks. Give an example of an external shock. Very good. The Iran Israel concept itself is an external shock. Yes, the Strait of Hormuz is going to be blocked. That is an external shock. Beautiful. Very good. Thereafter, he talks about domestic economic resilience and the window of opportunity which are opened or which have opened because of global supply chain disruption. Meaning, if Trump is going to tax China so much, Vietnam so much, it creates an opportunity for India also. Now, he says that we have to double down on each of these and create a certain regime where we can in a way balance all of these three. For example, he says for managing external shocks, we need to have FTA, which is free trade agreement. Free trade agreements with nations which allow us to trade exclusively with them, which is go for bilateral understanding, making it immune to global concepts. Second, diversify the supply chain. And this is where India has preempted something. And as one of you pointed out, Russia is the diversification which we did, which is a good thing which we were able to do. At the same point of time, he says that if we are doing FTAs and diversifying the supply chain itself, we should be also doubling down on what is called as production link incentive scheme, which is called PLI, wherein for certain you can say production targets, we give subsidies to the government, to the different you can say actors. That allows us to be export oriented. Then he also argues that we need to have capital expenditure, which the government of India, as it is doing, creates more employment. Thereafter, we need to have our monetary policy also in the expansionary. This is where something which we discussed in the second article comes with regards to here, that we needed to have a positive fiscal policy and a positive monetary policy, which we already have. And thereafter, with regards to window of opportunity, we should be able to have bilateral understandings. We should be able to chase the commodities which are now in demand, but the original supply chain has been disrupted. So, together, the whole gist of this article is that in order for India to, in a way, survive this turmoil phase, we have to go for bilateral understandings. We have to diversify our supply. We have to keep our domestic policy positive. And at the same point of time, we have to find commodities where the original supply chain has got disrupted, and we can now become the, you can say, a pillar in the gap, or at least we can become a substitute for those nations. So steering the Indian economy amidst global crisis or troubles is this is how you steer. Just keep this slide with you. You can use these points for any question as a conclusion for any of these crises. Meaning, if there is any question on tariff wars, Russia, Ukraine, Iran, Israel, or general outlook, use these as the solution, conclusion, way forward, saying that India needs to diversify, free trade agreement, PLI, positive monetary policy, that way. This is how this article is a very good conclusion. It gives you a lot of way forwards in that. And that will, green infrastructure for oil is good, but that is, Mashindra will need a lot of time. This is short term mitigation, not long term mitigation. Right? Okay. How will UPSC ask you a question? Simple. Discuss how India can mitigate the global headwinds and changing tariff lands. Simple question in GS paper 3. I told you GS paper 3 heavy paper today, and you can just use these points. Okay. What is the difference between conclusion and way forward? See, conclusion is a generic word. Conclusion can be in three ways. It can be a way forward, it can be significance, it can be impact. Way forwards are given for issues which are still developing or are issues which are systemic to, for example, education, energy crisis, global geopolitics, or what we call as health issues. You should give way forwards. How can we, and you have to look at the question nature also. Way forward is how can we improve it? But for example, in a question with regards to geography, history, static subjects, even polity, you can also talk about what is called as the significance of that event, of that process, or the impact of that process, event in that sense. So, in most cases, history questions, GS paper 1, you don't write too many way forwards. You write conclusions as impact and significance. On the other hand, in GS paper 2, you tend to write way forwards. And in GS paper 3 also you write more way forwards because you have something to further say. So this is the main difference in that. Right. So in debate, you take the middle path. Make the middle path. Balance it. Middle path is most important. Now, the last major topic, and this is again from data point, it is called a very beautiful section in that regard of the Hindu newspaper itself. Data point talks about certain important indicators which are, in a way, telling us where India stands vis-a-vis these developed nations. So, what this data point talks about is something called critical technologies, which is AI, biotechnology, semiconductor, space, and quantum. Based on dual use and geopolitics, there is an index called critical and emerging technologies, in which semiconductors is the future as it is right now, because for all computing you need semiconductors. 35% weightage is given. AI 25%, this is the future. Biotechnology 20%, space 15%, and quantum 5%. Based on this, India has been ranked among 25 countries. And whilst we argue and want to be a global superpower, if you look at the data, it is not very encouraging. Meaning, if I place in AI, biotechnology, semiconductor, space, and quantum, and taking the total score, India is not in a good space specifically for semiconductors, as it is we don't have the rare earth metals needed for that. But in multiple cases, we are bigger economies than those countries, but they are better in performance in multiple other factors. For example, see, take into consideration France, Germany, South Korea, and Taiwan. And though we are better than the uh, for example, the French. When it comes, we are worse than in French with regards to AI. We're better than Taiwan. But if you look at the other aspects, Taiwan 10.1 score with regards to semiconductor. This is where India consistently in AI, biotechnology, semiconductor space, and quantum is, you can say, below average. And in the larger scheme of things, vis-a-vis the US, China, it is lagging. It is lagging. So these type of data points basically help you in contextualizing things in that regard. And the basic conclusion which came out is that India, in most emerging technologies, needs to invest further, do more R&D, because we are not very well placed, and the nations under us are not claiming to be or want to be, except for Russia, global superpowers. Russia is just below us, but in space technology, it is much further ahead. And be it space and quantum, we are good, but semiconductors and AI, we aren't. The number of startups which are there, what type of research is happening, it is not very encouraging in that. So, again, use this in conclusions to argue that based on a certain index, we need further investment and further, you can say, the government has to create policies which make sure that in all these critical technologies we are able to go forward. Nothing concrete is going to come out of it. It is just giving you a perspective. That's it. Now, before I go to the last topic, we have discussed a lot of things. We've discussed how the US has got involved in Iran Israel. We've discussed what is the difference between monetary policy, fiscal policy, and having both positive. What is the fallout? Why do we need it? We further discussed why foreign universities are coming to India and what is the reason for that. Further, we have been able to understand in the global headwinds which are there, how to mitigate it. And now we have also understood that with regards to AI, quantum computing, semiconductors, and other critical technologies, we are lagging and we are not even close to the first three. And we need to now do something about it. We have to become cognizant of it, and we have to create an economy which best suits it in that regard. The last is a prelims oriented topic, which is INS Tamal has now got commissioned and will be commissioned and will be in use from July 1st. Now, INS Tamal is one the last stealth multi-role frigate which has been produced in Russia. So it is basically a Kirvak class frigate. After this, all frigates with regards to Russia will be made in India with technology transfer. That is why it is significant. So you need to know the name Tamal. It has come from the Kaliningrad sector from Russia. It is a Kirvak class frigate in what we call as Russian sector. And now for you, what is the difference between a frigate and a destroyer becomes important. Meaning, what are the different types of you can say boats or carriers which are there? You should know that. First is this is the static portion. First is an aircraft carrier, basically an airport on water, and it is basically a city on water itself. And the idea is aircraft carriers are the backbone. India needs three. India has two. In order to have presence in the Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea, and Bay of Bengal together, India needs three. India has two. Then cruiser. Cruiser is a ship which mostly accompanies an aircraft carrier. It is much faster and basically is an escorting vehicle in that regard. Destroyer and frigate. The difference is between use and scale. A frigate is basically a small destroyer. Destroyer is based on having heavy machinery, heavy, you can say, artillery, and also some most cases it has ballistic missiles integrated into. However, frigates are much faster to hunt down submarines. They have more torpedoes, and at the same point of time, it has, in Indian case, Tamal has BrahMos integration. So it has cruise missile. Then you have a corvette. Corvette is the smallest. This a corvette mostly accompanies a destroyer or frigate. These are much quicker and are used for surveillance purposes and in a way escorting. Submarine, everybody understand, goes underwater, is very important for nuclear deterrence in this world. And then you have amphibious assault ships, which can also carry army and other form of equipments inside. So frigates, as of right now, it is believed that destroyers and frigates are the future because detectability is also something very, very important. Yeah, aircraft carriers are the biggest. On this note, we have now completed the 7 to 8 articles which we had basically set out to complete at 10 a.m. I hope all of this made sense to you. Tomorrow again I'll be there and I can all automatically give you again give you an understanding that there will be something on Iran and Israel. If it is irrelevant or is just random news or just additional understanding, I won't cover it. But if there's something very concrete which comes out, we will discuss it. But do understand one thing: Iran, Israel, and US. Any form of notes, if you are making, don't make it right now. World War II, most probably Wednesday. Don't make it right now. Let the dust settle, because if you will start to add so much information in your articles, it will in turn become too much. And therefore, you need to have concrete arguments ready. We will use it in that regard. I'll do that, Rekha. The idea is very simple. The idea is very simple that there are certain topics which keep on changing, they keep on evolving. This is an evolving concept. Why US needs to balance India? Because India has the potentiality and in a way can become a major superpower in the Asian sector. So US has this policy of always balancing potential powers. That is where India comes. Right. So wait for at least 1 to 2 weeks. Once this topic starts to become more and more, you can say, a little bit more settled down, you will have better perspective. Better perspective. Right? Okay. Thank you so much. Take care. I'll see you tomorrow.